So thank you for being here. It's late in the day, and we really appreciate you being here for the ADU as Age-Friendly Housing session. My name is Bandana Shrestha. I'm the Director for Community Engagement for AARP Oregon, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We have a great panel. These four lovely people who are giving their time. They're going to share their insights and expertise on how ADUs fit into the whole age-friendly housing scenario. And today you've heard a lot about aging. Some of it has been really interesting and new. Some of it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And so hopefully you'll hear some things that'll affirm some of what you've heard and hopefully some new things. We hope you'll go away with some new ideas. And we also want to encourage you to think about asking your questions, things you have not yet had a chance to put forth to some of the folks who either have personal experience living in an ADU, who have built ADUs, who are making policies related to ADUs, and experts who have a lot to say about age-friendly issues generally. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel, and what we have agreed we're going to do is after this little short intro, we're going to have each one of them spend a few minutes doing an introductory presentation. And after we've had everybody do a presentation, I'll start with maybe one or two prepared questions just to get the conversation started. But we really hope that this will be more of a conversation with you and with all of the folks who are up here, and we can create our own learning together. Because I know a lot of you are doing some interesting work. I've had a chance to talk to Babs, who's here, and some other folks who are already doing stuff around the country too. So that's what our hope is. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite, actually let me run through who's at the panel, right? Let's do that. Sound good? I found out that I had forgotten to print out our little planning sheet. So I'm gonna, make up their bios as I go. No, actually, I feel pretty confident. These are great people. And especially Alan. I've known Alan for a long time. Dr. Alan DeLaTorre is a research associate at the Portland State University Institute on Aging. He's the co-coordinator of the Age-Friendly Portland Initiative. He was on the ground floor in terms of really putting age-friendly initiatives on the map in the United States. He's been working on these issues since he was a wee baby, right, Alan? Not quite, but so Alan, and especially his focus is on housing, so it's great to have him here. Next to Alan is Debbie Cahill. Debbie happens to be an AARP volunteer right now, but she's had a long history of great work as an advocate. Before she moved to Oregon, she was in Nevada and worked as a government relations staff for the Nevada Education Association. And she's also somebody who bought a home with an ADU and has her experience to share with you. Next, we have Huntley. Holly is a builder with environs, right? And PDX. And I think is your home on the tour?
One of my clients.
She has one. If you're going on a tour, you will see a home that she's been very instrumental in making happen, right? So we're excited to have her and her voice on the panel today. Finally, we have Todd Borkowitz. Did I say that last name correctly, Todd?
Good job.
Thank you. And Todd is with the City of Portland. He's a senior planner, and he's working on a very interesting project, which I think you'll find interesting and help us elucidate how ADUs fit into the whole age-friendly housing universe. So with that, I'm going to invite Alan. Alan, are you going to come up here, or are you going to do? You are? Okay, great. I'm going to go and sit down. And I'm also going to keep time.
Well, thanks to Bandana, and Bandana is involved in so much in what's going on in Oregon, and we've been working together now for 10 plus years, which is really, really exciting. I get to do the egghead thing, which is talk a little bit about demographics and give you some insight into what age-friendly really is, talk a little bit about the principles, and then we'll circle back to some of the work that we've been doing here. So I'm going to jump into it because I have a little too much, I think, here, so I've tried to trim it. But to start with, our window for preparing for an aging population is closing. We've been saying this for quite some time, but really there's some statistics that I want to share with you to show where we are with respect to our demographic transition or demographic kind of changes, and why that's important with respect to the type of housing that we're building, including small houses and ADUs. So first of all, this is a demographic imperative. This is something that we need to look at front and center. There are two major demographic changes that are occurring in the United States: the aging of our population and the diversification of our population. And both of those are linked in some ways, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. So the first boomers started turning 65 in 2011. So we're not at the beginning of this. We're kind of inside the aging of our population at this moment. And to quickly point to the screen here, it's kind of hard to read, I know, for those in the back, but this line represents 2020 and the crossover point for younger children and older people as a percentage of the global population. So we are now about to witness a higher proportion of older people in our world than we are going to see younger people in our world. So this is interesting. I mean, I could go into a lot of information regarding economic development, perceptions on aging. The idea here is that we need to start preparing for this population in a number of different ways. So for the next 2 decades, our households are going to become older and experience increasing rates of mobility-related disabilities. And I'm going to show some statistics regarding disability in just a moment. Renters and homeowners both are in need of home modifications and are going to be increasingly housing cost burdened. This is all renters and homeowners as a group will see increasing housing cost burdens. And housing with access to services, even for those independent older adults, will be increasingly needed. It's really important that we think about access to services as something that's a universal need. So as a father of a 3.5-year-old and an 8.5-month-old, I think a lot about accessibility through a different lens than as a gerontologist and as a researcher. And it started to hit me over the head. Wow, it's really hard to get around with a stroller and a handful of groceries and bags and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to very briefly talk about this slide. I don't want to go too much into detail, but this top piece here is showing the total population of people who are older in the United States. So we see in 2012 about 43 million people. It increases to about 56 million in 2020, 73 million in 2030, and then to close to 80 million, 84 million by 2040 and 2050 respectively. And then the important thing to note is that right here in 2040, we see the peak of the proportion of people age 65 and older. So more than 1 in 5 people in the United States will be age 65 and older. So over to the right here, I know it's kind of hard to see as well, but what you see are 3 different lines. This top red line represents the total projected number of US residents 65 and older. The second line, which is the green line, shows the native-born population, and the lower line shows the foreign-born population. And just so I can get everybody understanding what these numbers say, our total population growth from 2015 to 2050 is going to be 105%, where the native-born population is about 75%, but the foreign-born population of older adults in the country is rising in that time period of about 298 or 95%. So this is the grain and the diversification of our population. And this is important because we have some variations that exist in the type of housing that people see as appropriate for themselves and their families. And we'll get a chance to talk about some of our personal experiences later, but there are some personal experiences in my family's life that show kind of how we're aging differently and how our housing situations are different. With respect to additional demographic trends, we're moving from older households, and this is a household with an older person that is living in it, from about 1/4 in 2016 to about 1/3 of all households in 2035. So in just a 20-year period, we're seeing this increase from about 25% to about 33% of all of our households. Increased accessibility is critically important. So households that are aged 80 plus, or people who are aged 80 and older who live in those, are going to increase at a higher rate than those other households. And the fastest growth is going to occur from about 2025 to 2035. So we're about 7 or 8 years away from seeing this rapid aging of the oldest old in our households. And this is really important because we can look at disability prevalence by age. So just taking a quick number here, the 45 to 54-year-old category, about 20% of that category, and this is, all of those in that 10-year cohort, will have about a disability. Whereas when we start to get a little bit older, we jump up the 70 to 75. It's about 43% or so with a disability, about 30% with a severe disability. And then when we get to the 75 and older, we've got more than half of our population that has a disability. And so these populations, this growth of the oldest old population is going to be the most rapid increase, and they have the highest needs with respect to accessibility. So a couple of other things to quickly touch on. Renters are more likely than homeowners to have mobility disabilities. However, they have the hardest time making modifications in their homes, right? A lot of covenants or policies that are in place to say if you change something, you have to change it back. And there are some approaches and strategies that we could actually use to mitigate that to a certain extent. And that policies are needed to ensure that our new stock is really built with higher levels of accessibility. And I'm going to stay away from the policy side of things and let another panelist talk about that today. But projections really do reveal this sharp increase in older adults that are likely to experience housing cost burdens. Renters are most vulnerable, but homeowners are most numerous. So this is affecting both sides of the market, the renter and homeowner markets. So what is age-friendly housing? This will kind of prime us for what we're looking at next. So an age-friendly community is friendly for all ages, not just elder-friendly. Even though this project started by looking at a dual trend that was happening globally, the rapid urbanization of the world and the rapid aging of our population, increasingly we're understanding that age-friendly communities are about all ages and all abilities. But there are some aspects of age-friendly housing that are important to keep in your mind as we move through this session. Age-friendly housing is affordable, it's hooked up to essential services like plumbing and electricity, it's designed to be accessible, safe, and appropriately equipped, things like the types of appliances that we have in our home. It's able to be modified efficiently and affordably. Connor, who's in the audience, was talking about some interesting work that's going on in Toronto. So I'm really excited to know that there are folks in the development community who are actually looking at this modifiable approach. It's able to be maintained over time, right? As we get older, as we have more disabilities, it's more difficult to maintain a large yard or something that needs a lot of upkeep. It's accessible to services, including transportation, shopping, and health services. It's connected socially to community and or family. It's accessible in a range of sizes, which is really what we're talking about today. And increasingly, we're starting to understand that aging in place might actually be aging in a smaller unit. And now, there's a danger of looking at like single room occupancy as very small, shared spaces that do exist to warehouse people who are low income and older. It's not what I'm advocating for here, but to think about small housing as an option in a number of ways. And then also, age-friendly housing is healthy and it's livable, right? It's got good paint. It's thinking about air circulation. It's located in places that make sense. I did my dissertation research. I found that people who, one project here in Portland decided to put the older side of the residence next to the freeway because they were older and couldn't hear as well. Well, they were more affected in their sleep patterns by the noise of traffic. They were more affected by the smog that was coming off the freeway than other residents. And so it was kind of a backward way of thinking, and it actually impacted those residents negatively. So a few age-friendly housing concepts and approaches to just quickly discuss, because these things are important in your work as you move forward. So accessibility is a broad term, probably most commonly used when we talk about age-friendly housing or housing that works for people who are older and with disabilities. It's often linked to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's very closely related to commercial building code. So single-family residences, single-family zones very rarely have a component of accessibility that's built into them unless it's in local code, which is where Todd comes in, and we'll get a chance to talk about this a little later. Visitability is a concept we're going to talk about. Visitability normally has 3 basic criteria: a zero-step entrance, wide halls and doors, and a bathroom that somebody in a wheelchair or a walker could get into, use that restroom, and get out of in some way. Lifelong housing is an approach that's being taken both in Oregon, in Southern Oregon and here in the Portland region, that looks at kind of 3 tiers of accessibility. Visitability as the baseline, what would be more fully accessible as the second or silver level, and then that gold level is specialized accessibility that would lead to somebody who is blind or low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, to have those specialized elements of that house in those homes. So somebody who's able-bodied might not care as much about something like an audible or a visual flashing kind of warning. Then adaptable or modifiable housing, this is less of a set kind of, I'm right there. It's adaptable and modifiable housing is not really a set industry as much as it is an approach to allowing people to get their needs met as they age. So their homes could be modified, like the height of their counters, or going from no grab bars to grab bars because it was already backed within the backing was beneath the sheetrock inside of the bathroom. And then aging in place and community specializations, CAP certification is through the Home Builders National Association of Home Builders. That's a way that you can find somebody who's really good at things like kitchen and bathroom design if they've got CAP certification, something that you could take as a course to learn about kitchen and bath modifications. And I'm going to end with this slide. I just want to talk really quickly about how ADUs can assist in addressing age-friendly needs and opportunities. From the need side, affordability, and I heard a speaker in the last session say this might not be capital A affordability with respect to hitting a certain median family income, but it might be what we're talking about as more affordable than a larger house or the typical type of housing that's being built. It's accessible, obviously, we just talked about that. It's safe. And I think universal design principles actually will get to some of that, although I would caution you about saying universal design as a solution to design criteria, because they are very often hard to interpret and move over into, design guidelines essentially. It's easy to maintain, and these opportunities are, we can create housing that works for people across different ages and abilities. We can plan for changes in mobility and health, from a mother with a stroller to somebody who might need a mobility device in the future. And there are opportunities for sustainable lifestyles. I'm getting linked up with somebody next week from Stanford University who's really looking at gray and green, how older adults can actually be a catalyst for changing environmental concerns and looking at sustainability opportunities of the future. So I challenge all of you, here's a little bit about age-friendly housing, to try and incorporate that into your thinking, your work, your projects, and we'll circle back to some of the details in a minute.
All right, let's give him a hand. So now we have to decide, was it Todd or was it Debbie who was going to go?
It might have been me. Yeah.
Okay.
I may have mistaken
Come on
myself.
over. There you go. And the thing is over here.
Where's it?
This one right here. I already introduced him, so I'm not going to reintroduce him.
So I'm going to stick to my script a little bit here, so make sure that I
Yes, I'm
stay
keeping
on
to-
time. I got that pressure. So, yes, my name is Todd Borkowitz. I'm with the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I'll be briefly discussing how the City of Portland is advancing age-friendly housing through the residential infill project. The project is actively developing housing solutions to help address a range of concerns related to Portland's growing population, including a need for greater number of and a greater diversity of smaller units, specifically in areas near good transit, walkable streets, and key services. Portland is growing. By 2035, the city is expecting to add 123,000 new households and 260,000 new residents added to its population of about 620,000 people. It's projected that 20% of the city's future population will be located in Portland's single-dwelling neighborhoods in housing forms that lack incentives and requirements to help meet basic mobility needs of seniors and other people with basic mobility needs. As Portland grows, it's also changing. It's experiencing significant demographic shifts. Trends are indicating smaller households, greater racial and cultural diversity, and most relevant to this forum, and like other cities, an increasing senior population. So this project was originally envisioned to address a pretty wide spectrum of increasing concerns around these changes, including demolitions, neighborhood compatibility, displacement, housing affordability, and other concerns. These concerns are being addressed in three project topics that are identified here: the scale of houses, narrow lots, and housing opportunity. Essentially, collectively, these draft proposals would reduce the size of houses that could be built, while also prescribing that more flexibility happen within them, i.e. more units can happen within them, towards the goal of incentivizing smaller housing types like ADUs that are more accessible and affordable, while also helping to retain existing houses. To help guide this project, a 26-person stakeholder advisory committee of neighborhood representatives, developers, and advocates, including my fellow panelist Ellen DeLaTorre here, and we have one or two others in this room here. Thank you. Advised the project staff for over 13 months towards concepts around these three topics. After a summer of vetting these concepts with the residents, City Council in December 2016 directed project staff to develop draft code and mapping proposals around them. The discussion draft is now up for public review. Comments are due November 20th. I have a few printed summaries with me if anybody would like to see the entire proposal, but I really hope to stay focused right now on the age-friendly ADU provisions that are part of the project. These specific provisions are addressed in the third topic, housing opportunity. So right now, a new housing overlay zone would be allowed one additional unit beyond what is allowed today, with the caveat that at least one of the units be a basic level of accessibility. And I just want to say that again, that an additional unit would be allowed beyond what's allowed today, with the caveat that that at least one of the units on the lot meet a basic level of accessibility. And I'll get into that more in a second. But on lots where currently one house plus one ADU is allowed, which we do allow throughout the entire city of Portland in single dwelling zones, the proposal would allow a duplex or two ADUs. On corner lots where a duplex is allowed, a lot could have a duplex plus an ADU or a triplex. One additional unit would also be allowed if all units are deemed affordable. One desired result, more smaller units citywide, and units that, due to the smaller size and better design, are more affordable and accessible to Portland's increasingly aging population. To maintain consistency with the goals and policy framework of Portland's 2035 Comprehensive Plan, a conceptual overlay zone focuses additional density allowances on areas near Portland centers and corridors, as well as in areas close to the central city and in places with good walkability. This conceptual overlay was then expanded to include areas near areas near services, schools, and parks that are a little bit beyond the quarter-mile radius. The quarter-mile radius from centers and corridors. It was also reduced in areas to exclude areas that had significant physical barriers, infrastructure constraints, and where a displacement risk analysis that the city is working on indicated that displacement might occur more rapidly. The draft proposals require that when a new unit is built beyond what is currently allowed on a lot, at least one unit must be visitable. As Alan kind of talked about, it's a base level of accessibility. This would help people of all ages with minimal accommodation from others. And in this project, we defined visitable as three key things. One is a zero-step entrance, a zero or no-step entrance that can be readily retrofitted with a ramp to ensure access to the unit. Number two would be hallways and doorways that are at least 34 inches wide to accommodate wheelchairs. And then the third is both a bathroom and a dedicated living area on the same floor as the visitable entrance to allow for use of the bathroom and for provide a living area for socializing. So again, it's not meant to provide fully accessible living, but it is it does aim to just add a basic level of accessibility beyond what's allowed today in single dwelling for single houses. There are some exceptions to the provision. Steeply sloping lots and lots that that can't make an accessible entrance due to its slope between the sidewalk and the main entrance, and internal conversions to existing structures would also be exempt from this requirement. Additional components beyond the visitability provisions would also benefit seniors and others with limited mobility. These include we have a current 10-foot setback that we have in the R25 and R5 zone. It's proposed to be increased to 15 feet. This would allow for more space to better accommodate an accessible path from the street. And the second is an above-grade exterior stairs leading to a street-facing entrance would be limited to 6 steps, limiting the long, tall flights of stairs that are often built just to access a unit. And third, we have cottage cluster to incentivize cottage cluster development, a term that you may have heard today. It's a development type that can foster community-oriented housing and minimize social isolation. Would be streamlined and allowed one ADU for each primary dwelling unit. Currently, These types of developments are allowed through what's called a planned development process, but we don't allow accessory dwelling units through that process. Anyhow, collectively, this package of proposed zoning improvements strives to better meet changing housing needs of Portland's current and future residents. It complements zoning improvements being proposed in other zones, and serves as just one of many important tools for expanding age-friendly ADU development and other forms of housing in Portland. Thanks.
Yay, good job. Oh, just so good. You were so good. You get a prize for it, but I don't have one right now. So Debbie, you're on. I'm not. I don't know how to turn it on.
All right, we'll leave it.
Quite I don't have any pictures to show you, but I think this is a bedroom level up here. So if there's not an elevator in there, it's not age friendly. I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Debbie Cahill. I'm going to talk to you about my own personal experience trying to get into an ADU. One of my nephews, who is the only one of my nephews who has bothered to procreate, moved in with me in Las Vegas in 2012, and he now has 3 children who I am in love with. So when I knew I was going to retire, they had already decided they were going to move to Portland. And having lived together with them, I kept saying, well, I'll go to Portland too when I retire, but I want to be close but separate. I couldn't emphasize that separate part enough. So they happened to find a house that had an ADU. And so together I helped them with the down payment. We purchased the house. I was still in Nevada and I started to remodel the house. Big mistake. The house, it turned out, the ADU portion, when the inspector came in to do, we were close to the final inspection, said, oh, wait a minute, this isn't an ADU. You're not allowed to have this kitchen here. It's not permitted. This house had been built, the main house had been built in 1989. The ADU was added on sometime right after in the early 90s, so they were kind of ahead of their time. So our first instinct was, okay, somebody lied about the ADU, who do we sue? We hired an attorney. The attorney did all the research. Turns out that an appraiser had actually noticed that it wasn't properly permitted. And nobody said anything. So anyway, so we had to set about to get the permit to fix the problem. The ADU is attached to the main house, and really the only thing that we needed to make it legal and to keep the kitchen was to build a firewall. So the permit, and this, I have a Portland address, but I live in Washington County. I'm in an unincorporated part of Portland. To get the permit, it cost $7,000. To get the permit, I had to hire an architect to draw plans, not just for the ADU, but the entire house. We had to have a floor plan. We had to get a clean water permit from the clean water folks. Anyway, so it was obviously an unexpected expense. We finally got the firewall. We had to undo a lot of the remodeling that had been done to get the firewall up. Had to put in all fire doors. But we finally got it done. I moved in a year ago, last August. So the end of this story is that I no longer live there. It was a 2-story unit. It had it's 839 square feet. A third of that living space is in a 2nd-story loft area, big open loft. And it's a great unit. It's the bedroom and the kitchen and the bathroom are all downstairs with a little dining area. But going up and down those stairs all the time, well, I'll blame it on my dog. She's 14, and she wasn't happy with the stairs. But the bottom line is that I found a house. It's a single-story house in a 55-plus community in an area called Bethany. And part of the motivation to move there and move out of that ADU was that I having just been newly retired, I started to feel more like an appendage of the family. I love babysitting the kids. I love being close to the family, but I wanted to do more. I wanted to be able to, live my life and make new friends and enjoy that aspect of living. But the house that I bought is a single-story house, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and I'm going to have to remodel and do some retrofitting. I'll have to take care of that. But that's one consideration, I think, when people talk about a granny flat and we're going to move grandma in or we're going to move our mother or father in, that sense of isolation might happen even though they may have access to certain things, transportation and activities. So it's just kind of a psychological thing.
That's great. Thank you, Debbie.
Happy Friday, everybody. I'm the builder voice on the panel. My name's Holly. My company is Environs. That's me right there. I'm not entirely sure what I'm here for. Probably, hopefully, to answer some questions that you might have. My lens is as a builder. I've probably built 6 ADUs, new construction, for folks' parents who are moving to Portland, and this is going to be conceivably their last home. And then some of those were designed with a specific intent to address mobility and accessibility issues that were either current or, my client felt like that was something that was in their near future. So yeah, Willie Dean is in the back there, and he and I have worked on 2 designs. He's been the designer for 2 of our accessible projects. And then we have one on the tour tomorrow, the North Williams ADU. So, and then as a side note, I had the opportunity to design and build my own ADU a few years ago, and just thought to myself, like, I wanted a 1-level house, and I was like, well, okay, I'll just, I'll make it no thresholds, I'll make the doors wider, I'll make everything, so that anybody could use it, whether it's a person that just has a broken leg or, somebody who has an animal. I had an animal at the time who didn't get around too well. So I think I like to even encourage my clients who are able-bodied, like, to consider that for themselves, or just to add something accessible or, more thoughtfully designed to the housing market, since we just have a pretty limited inventory of those units. So, but mainly, I'm still not sure why I'm here. And it's because it's Friday at 5 o'clock. No. But I'm happy to answer any questions related to cost, feasibility, construction, and what the process looks like insofar as my knowledge goes.
Make sure you ask all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please give me. So, I think what you all bring is, each one of you has such a different perspective, from Debbie, who has, moved in and moved out of a ADU, Alan, who's been working on age-friendly issues, to Todd, who is in the middle of really looking at how a city can respond to an aging population, to Holly, of course, even though she's like, what am I doing here? Obviously, you are, you built one yourself, so an age-friendly ADU at that. So I think that's an important voice, because part of what we see at AARP is that, it's like you heard today, right? It's complicated. If you want change, it takes time, and it takes lots of different solutions from different sectors. Certainly, for us, we're mostly interested in what the experience of the end user is. How easy is it for them to find the kind of housing they need, or to build the kind of housing they need. But it's a wild, wild west, like you heard today. There are no real guidance, guidelines. There's nobody to hold your hand. If you're a person who's building or trying to purchase an accessible home or an age-friendly home, or really think about how you're going to make additions to your home, there's not like a it's really hard to navigate. So it's great to have this opportunity where we have so many different people represented here, and I hope you'll ask some questions of our audience. And so what I'm going to do is I have a bunch of questions, and as I mentioned, I had forgotten to bring my printout, but I have it all on my handy dandy iPhone here. So I'm going to start out with the questions, and in the meantime, I encourage you to think of the questions you want to ask our panel here, and let's get started with really having a conversation. Some of your thoughts and questions for our panel. One thing I want to maybe mention that I didn't when we started is that you heard a lot about people talking about how communities are aging, and AARP, we've been working on housing, but I think it's only in the last few years that, at least here in the state, we're really doing a lot of deeper work in terms of livable communities. And part of it is because AARP does really great research, and we've been surveying our members in the wider 50 plus, and now more and more 45 plus Americans about their aspirations for as they grow older, And what we hear consistently is that people want to be able to remain in their own home and community as long as possible. 90% or so say that. And we know, just like Holly said, most of the homes are not accessible. Most of the homes are not really, truly age-friendly. They don't have the trifecta that that makes for age-friendly homes: affordability, accessibility, and amenity-rich. Whether you're talking about walkable context, or you're talking about size or scale of home, those kind of things. So that's sort of the context we come with, and then we know the struggles that consumers have. So what are the solutions? Some are policy solutions, some are market solutions, and others are still trying to better understand and innovate. So I have questions, but in the meantime, as I scroll and find my questions, does anybody want to go ahead, Dana?
So I'm in the middle or in the beginning stages of building a little cottage development for all ages, but there are a lot of us with some gray hairs. So what are the most common things that are overlooked that we should be building in?
Did you want me to repeat the question, folks? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some considerations? Do you want to take a shot at it, Alan?
Yeah, just to common considerations. We were asked to repeat questions so folks in the back could hear. So common considerations for age-friendly housing or housing that'll work across the life course. I'd say that this entry point is really one of the top and most important pieces. And here in Portland, we're starting to ask zero-step entry, or really a consideration that is difficult to manage is the threshold. So we live in a wet environment here. The question is, where do you live? And so how do you keep water out but let people in? I think that is critically important. Modifiable is really important, especially with respect to the kitchen and the bathroom. So in particular, backing that bathroom wall, because not everybody wants a grab bar in there now, but think about the need to tear out sheetrock, put backing in the future. And so my suggestion would be backing the entire wall in the bathroom, because you're never exactly sure where that grab bar should fit in, what type of grab bar that you're looking for. There's some new cool kind of designs that are out there as well. So you may put in a raised toilet eventually, and what happens if your grab bar, your blocking was down there at the regular toilet height? So those types of things are critically important. And then some real easy things like lever handles, or what we use sometimes, we talk about the no kind of, it's kind of the fist rule, or the no kind of dexterity. So can you open it without needing to use with a closed fist, basically? So to a lever handle, or even to push a door similar to something like this if it's a larger kind of amenity. In addition to that, I think bathrooms and access to that shower are really critically important. So are curbless showers possible? Is the drainage in that bathroom really appropriate for a curbless shower? So, making sure that water is not causing water damage over time. Those are some top things. I'd go even further to say lighting is critically important, and HVAC system is really important. Lighting and HVAC. So making sure that your temperature is actually in a good, comfortable setting as well.
Holly, what about you? Do you have some solutions? Because you have, you're building small spaces, and one of the things I hear is, when you have small spaces, it's not possible to build accessibly. But that doesn't. In our conversation, you said there are things that So can you elaborate on what Alan has started?
Yeah, it's certainly. I think the bathroom scene with the the shower threshold is a little tricky. Not necessarily because of the space, but because of building code. If you don't know what I mean, lucky you. There are some like off the shelf things, like the little thresholds, the rubber thresholds that compress if you need them to. And that's kind of getting into details much, but sheeting the bathroom in plywood under the drywall is a quick and cheap, easy thing to address all of the grab bars in the shower stall and around the toilet. I think that's pretty easy, and then I think Alan captured everything else.
Follow up. How do you make it adaptable? How do you make countertops adaptable?
Well, countertops, I'm just going to throw out there, I'm going to make a plug for, and I know Melissa's sitting right there, and Melissa's from our national office. She's our editor of our Louisville Community's website that AARP has. If you haven't gone there, please visit. It's aarp.org/livable. No, in age-friendly. Yeah. So there you go. You're a builder, see? But right. But one of the stories that she's featured is lifelong housing certification. And if you just Google lifelong housing certification, on their website they have a checklist, which you can use as a tool to look at sort of the accessibility features you might want to build in, whether it's just visitable, fully accessible, or even the third and final goal level that Alan was talking about. But I think if you were talking about cottage clusters, some of the things that Debbie mentioned is cottage clusters have advantages in compared to even ADUs. Whereas ADUs, maybe if you have 2 ADUs, you have more families and more opportunity to interact, because like Debbie said, that whole idea of a home is not just a house, it's not just a shell. You want interaction and stuff. So how your common space is designed is going to be very important. And how you allow for people to gather. I know in one of the projects that the City of Portland is working on right now, the Better Housing by Design. We had that whole conversation around common spaces and how do you design it. Do you design it open outside in a rainy place like Oregon? Is that a good thing if you're really interested in getting people together because they might not use it, versus indoor and all that kind of stuff. So what about other folks? Do you have a question? Go ahead.
I have a question about how, I guess the marketing, but we talk about all these policies and changing our zoning laws to allow these ADUs, and then we talk about marketing. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's hard to kind of get people, elderlies and people with disabilities to actually go ahead and do this. And I mean, in a lot of cases they don't know about it, or even if they do know about it, they don't feel like that's a great example. And we heard Debbie's story as well. So I wonder if you've done any research, surveys, asking people about like the top issues, or if you know of any kind of top issues that people have, or top reasons that people wouldn't want to kind of take that opportunity and like either build an ADU and move to that accessible ADU, or and then the second question is what are some organizations, or I guess builders, or some programs that would do similar to like the kitchen renovations and like grab bars and stuff that they do for seniors and people with disabilities. If there are any organizations out there here or other places that kind of build ADUs for seniors.
So the question was related to marketing. How, has anybody done any studies related to preferences or reasons why older adults might or might not choose an ADU, inaccessible housing? And then the second part was, do we know of organizations that are doing retrofits or upgrades? Did I get it here or in other places? Hector, do you have an answer?
Well, not an answer, but a comment.
Okay.
Lindsay Shack is right here. She's an architect. I was here last seminar, the last workshop, and she mentioned something. They all did, but one of the things that they said was, if you want something done, you have to meet with us. We'll recommend. We'll tell you. It might cost money, but it's worth it to get the expertise from a professional one time. I mean, to me, and somebody said, somebody threw a $1,000 answer. Says they wanted me to change something. And he answered, it'll cost you $1,000. Well, to you and I, it's a lot of money.
Right.
But it's gonna be more expensive trying to correct the problem than to do it right the first time.
Right. I think that's good advice. Try to get you don't do so that you'll have the same problem that Debbie might have. Well, do you have any answers to the question that was posed about research? Alan, do you know about preferential?
Go ahead.
Todd?
Well, go.
I've not been involved in any particular research that's looking at the marketing side of things, but I can tell you that the concept of visitability versus the idea of accessibility, I was talking with Connor earlier about this, that it kind of otherizes this issue, right? So when you say you need an accessible unit, you are aging, you have this potential issue, people are death denying, they're age denying in our culture. Whereas if you say, it would be really advantageous if you built a visitable unit so your mom or your neighbor or your daughter could come visit you. It's easy to accept that, right? Oh, right, I don't want to be exclusive. I'd love to be able to have a beer or a coffee with my neighbor, right? So it changes the conversation around. Or what happened in our residential infill project, which was really quite interesting. My job was to get in there and say, what about older adults? What about people with disabilities? And it only got so far. And then the mayor came into a meeting and I felt that same barrier that was kind of building up. And then I said, you know what, this is actually really good for cyclists and it's good for families. And he said, aha, right, this is a great issue. We want to look at it. But that aging issue is not that sexy. But if we're talking about this as more universal access, that everybody can kind of benefit from this in some ways, then it's an easier kind of understanding. Other marketing related things?
Not really. I would just, no.
Okay. Go ahead, Todd.
No, I was just going to kind of reiterate what Alan kind of said. In fact, we've had the conversation about this before. How can we elevate issues of accessibility in housing? And Alan's like, it's just not sexy sometimes. It's not something that you can really get people engaged in. Yeah, the response is everybody in here, I'm sure, has a story. I know all of our panelists do, about, a friend, relative, family member that is aging and has challenges, at least visiting a house, if not living in their own house. And so I think it's really that personal story that people have, hopefully, that will really continue to bring attention to this. And there is more questions.
Well, if I could really quickly answer the second part of that question. So who's out there that's doing this? So take a look at CAP certification from the National Association of Home Builders. And then anytime that you see somebody posting on their ADU or a small house or development site that they're all about universal design, ask them what that means. Ask them, how are you making that happen? Is it built into your design criteria? Because universal design is a set of criteria that are conceptual. They're not design guidelines. And so ask them to tell you what that means, and you'll get a good answer or you'll get a bad answer. And from there, you can kind of make a decision on whether that's somebody who you really want to pay for their services. I'm always curious when I see universal design what people mean with that, because it's such a complicated term. You can't build it into policy, and it's too broad at times. But there are a lot of really great organizations, and I think that what Todd was getting at, we all have this story, we all have this kind of interest in this in some way because we're all aging. Sometimes it's finding the people who have that cool story, like Holly's story, even though she might question whether she should be here or not,
Yeah.
we were all taken by it. And we're like, you're perfect for this because you live in a place that's accessible. You've done work for people that are, that need accessible development. So sometimes you got to look under the surface with the organizations or developers, designers to get to the true good ones.
And I want to go back and hearken to what you said, Alan, is that age-friendly doesn't mean it's just for the older adult. It really is about all ages and all abilities. I think if the more inclusive we are able to be and think about other advantages, I think for me, age-friendly is not for me only, but age-friendly is not only about accessibility. For an older adult, it might also mean a source of income, a source of having a family member live there and provide care. It can mean a lot of different things. We have a lot of comments and very few time. So I'm going to go with you, and then I'm going to go with you, Melissa, and then Emily, okay?
So this is a $64,000 question about how to let people know how to even do this. So in Marin County, I'm program director of the Aging Action Initiative. And one of the things we are doing is advocating for not just accessory dwelling units, but junior accessory dwelling units, which are a lot less expensive. You're just converting one of the bedrooms that you have, put in a wet bar, outdoor exit, double hotel door inside, and so $10,000, $20,000 at the most, and you can get your little extra unit in. How do you let older people know how to do that? Because even that can be daunting. So we have been talking about doing an insert in the Sunday paper. Our age-friendly groups in different communities are having workshops on this. Marin Villages is doing workshops on these. We do workshops for the frontline workers so that they know all the resources in our county. So we always have speakers come in to talk about, just like you,
Right.
how do you do it?
Yeah.
And so
I have an idea.
different techniques to use. But we also have in our county, Boca County, and our local foundation fund Rachel Guinness, who I don't think she's here, but she's here at the conference. She actually offers a free hour consultation to people who want to have, find out, is this even something I should pursue, and talk to an architect about. So, and that is up to a $2,500 consultation.
Yeah,
so
that's
that
great.
is a partnership that was set up through the county with the local advocate in our county. So those are some ideas.
Yeah, no, those are great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Linda Jackson, is your name?
Linda Jackson.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
no, we're learning. We love that, and I know that Babs is here too. I want to come to you, even though you didn't raise your hand. No, but hang on. I want to go to Melissa first, because let's see what Melissa has to say, and then I'll come back.
Okay, I'm going to respond to all of these questions. So as Bandana said, we're colleagues. I'm in the AARP national office. We have a livability initiative. AARP is working on this issue nationwide. We have our own website, newsletter, and publications. I would like to talk to you because I think that junior accessibility dwelling units is a really interesting idea.
We call them J-Dues.
J-Dues.
Like A-dues.
We like J-Dues,
Okay.
A-Dues, okay.
And that is something we would totally do an article about for the website and put out in our newsletter, which goes mainly, as I said, to influencers and active residents.
I'll get you, let's talk after.
So we'll talk.
Okay.
In terms of marketing, and this is something that you've done, and that I love this program, that it's in the Rogue Valley program.
Yeah.
Which is a lifelong housing certification program that Bandana worked very closely on, where a homeowner or a builder will have a house kind of, inspected, and it's determined, okay, you know what, this is a level 1, 2, or 3 in terms of accessibility. Is it good for visitability? Or is it good for somebody who's going to live here and you use a wheelchair or something?
Mobility
or
device.
The level 3 is very high tech.
Yeah.
But the great thing about that program is that it goes into the multiple listing services of that the realtors use. So if somebody is house shopping or renting and says, you know what, I have a child with who uses a wheelchair.
Yeah.
The realtor can just put in, these are the things, and those houses will show up.
Yeah.
And the second to that is that the program you mentioned, look up Lifelong Housing, the newsletter that we publish, which is free, this coming week, just by chance,
We'll have that,
we'll
yeah.
have the article that Bandana wrote about this program.
Yeah.
So if you sign up, get on the list, you would get it
Yeah.
send you on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think yeah, please do, check out our newsletter, but also the idea is how do you make it easy both for policymakers, influencers, the people who are making investments and making policy to learn about what options are available, and then also for the consumer. Emily, did you have a question for me, or?
This kind of builds on the questions that were just raised, but I'm just curious about added costs of adding some of the features that everyone's been talking about. So maybe from Holly's perspective, also from Todd's, the things that the residential infill project is considering. What is the kind of cost for these features and for getting to a basic level of visibility versus full accessibility?
Yeah. Holly, do you have any thoughts on the cost?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to say is that they're negligible.
I hope somebody taped that.
Yeah, it's just not a big deal. Your door might cost $15 more. It's $100 for the plywood for your bathroom. It's just mainly it takes some thought and planning, but it doesn't have to cost any more.
And I think especially in new construction also, it's obviously a lot easier to do it then than to try to retrofit.
Yeah.
There's an organization that's not really active anymore called Concrete Change. I think you can go to concretechange.org, and they've got a couple of specs with respect to the doing it at new construction versus retrofitting. And things like widening hallways and doorways are extremely cost prohibitive, but adding in like wide doors, it was something, it was in the tens of dollars. And then adding the entryway is actually really quite difficult at times because you're needing to ramp, and it's difficult when you've got constrained spaces, you're building in the setback, like Todd was saying earlier. So, but Concrete Change has got some great information about visitability. It's just not moving forward like it was at some point. And if you wanted to learn more about visitability, visitability.org is actually a great place to find out more information. And then you could link to the work that's been done here in the city of Portland, because there's an appendix in the residential infill project that has a visitability report that I worked on with some students, and we've got a database of 65 or so visitability policies from around the United States that you can access to learn more about zoning codes and really getting to the brass tacks of how we're creating regulatory and incentive-based policies in communities.
I would add to that. So Ellen also helped our residential infill project with two focus groups. One that was focused with developers, and one that was kind of more of a user group. And we did find out from the developers, specifically some of the affordable housing developers, that the zero-step entrance was cause for concern in terms of increasing costs. I see that as kind of an opportunity, actually, for aging and disability advocates to kind of partner with their affordable housing. I think oftentimes they have kind of the very similar end goals, and so it'd be nice for that partnership to kind of develop further.
Yeah, I was just saying to Todd how exciting it is that the city is considering this policy related to adding the second ADU, that it mandated that it should be accessible, but at the same time it seems it's just visitable. It's just visitable. That means somebody can visit. What about if somebody, we want to allow people to be able to live in that. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I know David had a question or a comment, and then somebody else, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
I just wanted to ask the question of why don't we push for cities to have some kind of regulation requiring visitability when we have new construction, whether it's an ADU or any kind of a home?
Why don't we?
Why don't we?
We should, right? And there are places that have visitability, just ordinances. They have also incentive-based ones where, universally, if you build a universal design, you get some certain things waived and all that kind of stuff. Any comments here? Otherwise, I'm going to short one.
That was my first question. But my second is there a place where there's just some concrete definition of what those different levels of livability are? I think you mentioned that earlier. There's 3 levels.
Yeah.
Well, I turned to AARP that does a lot of work around livability, which has evolved into this age-friendly component within the organization. But visitability.org is really about those basic criteria, whereas accessibility gets beyond visitability in a number of different ways. So yeah, I'd start with AARP because there's some comprehensive work that's there.
And Bandana's article, which
Yeah, that's a good one. I just wrote it. It's somebody else doing the work. I just am like the microphone. I would also say go to all of these. Obviously all these websites are have some information that pertain to what has been said today, and examples. Holly's website is also there, so you can contact folks and ask questions. You can always talk with us as well. So with that, we just have like a few minutes left, 1 minute left. So I want to give our panelists 30 seconds each, starting with Debbie. Any last words of wisdom for our group here? Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, if you buy a house with an ADU that's already there, just make sure you know it's a legal ADU. I mean, could save you a lot of heartache.
Thank you, Debbie.
Oh, dang it. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. I would just say don't let people tell you that it's prohibitive cost-wise. Don't buy that. It's not, especially from the new construction perspective. And then just, do what you can.
Thank you. Todd?
Get your permits. Seriously, don't stick a future resident kind of with this burden. Your house is your new house is probably going to last at least 100 years or so. You're likely not going to be in the house for that 100 years. Other people are going to have to really be dealing with the decisions that you make. And to that extent, if you could do things, even small things in your house right now, hopefully those things will carry on. So,
yeah. Before Alan, you say something, I want to mention. I just talked with Babs, who's with San Mateo, and they're considering an amnesty program, which basically I hadn't heard that. I thought that was really great for people like maybe Debbie, who would be stuck with dealing with all that. I don't know the details of it, but if you have, they're just starting that process. But I think that's a good process to have, the good policy to look at, because it's such an issue, and especially like Jake Wegman was saying this morning, when people are building in ways, otherwise the kind of ADUs we hear about are often for more affluent clientele, and those people who are stuck with things that are built without permits are people who actually need it the most. So I love that idea, and I'd like to track that. So finally, Alan, you have the last word.
So based on research, we know that people are making purchases of their homes in their 40s and 50s, and that home purchase is quite often the most important purchase for aging in place. So even I turned 40 this year. The next home purchase, if we make one as a family, will be possibly the most important one to plan for my future. And we can save tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars by aging in our homes, rather than needing to move to some skilled care facility or some long-term care place that requires us to pay $7,000 or $5,000 a month because we couldn't get up and down a set of stairs, right? And some interesting things as well, sorry, I know this is over 30 seconds, but residential elevators, what are the possibilities that are out there? They're not at the same strict code that commercial elevators need to be, and we learned in this focus group that it actually could be an opportunity that is out there that we're not really exploring to the best of our ability.
All right, let's give them a hand. Thank you all for being here. Let's go get some drinking done. Thank you.